Hello, my amazing friends. Today we start the story of a small shop that grew into a name you see on phones, TVs, fridges, and even in space technology. This is the story of Samsung. It's about trust, patience, and the courage to grow step by step. And as you listen, your English listening will get sharper because we keep it clear, simple, and interesting. We stood on a narrow street in Old Seoul and smelled the smell of dried fish mixed with the dust of the spring wind. Around the wooden crates lay rice as the only hope for the future. We heard the cries of the merchants echoing like distant alarm signals and understood that the world around us was hungry not only in body but also in soul. We were nobody then, just a small trading company with 3 vowels in its name that no one pronounced with respect. But we already had a spark inside that no one had seen. Our founder, Lee Byung-chul, looked at these streets and saw not ruins, but a blank canvas on which to write the future. His steps were quiet, but his heart beat like a drum before a battle. He believed that business could become a weapon not for war, but for the dignity of a country that was just beginning to recover. We traded rice, dried fish, noodles, and the invisible hope that one day it would turn into something more than just an exchange of goods. We lived in a world where one day could change fate because yesterday you traded in the market and tomorrow you could be swept away by a wave of change you didn't expect. The first unexpected turn came quietly, like a shadow. The Japanese occupation brought new laws, new faces, and a cold in the air, but we didn't break. We learned to work under supervision. We learned to hide ambitions in daily habits like seeds in the ground waiting for the time when it could sprout. The war that divided the country again overturned our table with goods, and we were left on bare ground. But it was the same ground we started with, and we knew how to grow a chance on it again. We started building relationships with suppliers as if we were building a bridge over a raging river, because we understood that those who stick together survive. We heard the city breathe at night, how factories a few blocks away were knocking in the darkness like the heart of a new world, and we felt that this knocking would soon become ours. We didn't seek to copy other people's dreams. We wanted to create our own, and this dream grew in a small office with wooden walls and the smell of freshly brewed tea, where the day began with a simple count of goods and ended with conversations about how to change our own destiny. We didn't know when, but we knew that this moment would come, and when it did, we were no longer the ones standing at the market with fish. We were the ones who learned to wait, act, and hold on to our dreams, even when everything around us was falling apart. We thought textiles would be our forever, but life had other plans. In 1969, the unexpected call of technology came to our door. South Korea was changing faster than we imagined. People wanted radios, TVs, and gadgets they had only seen in foreign movies. The government was encouraging local manufacturing, and we saw a door swinging open. We stepped through it without looking back. That year, we founded Samsung Electronics. Our first products were black and white televisions. They were heavy, box-shaped, and simple by today's standards, but when they lit up for the first time in our workshop, we felt like we were touching lightning. I still remember the first time we delivered one to a family in a small town. The children gathered in front of it like it was a magic window, and when the image flickered into life, their faces glowed brighter than the screen. That was the moment we knew we weren't just making products anymore. We were making experiences, memories, and dreams. But just as our confidence began to grow, disaster struck. One autumn shipment of televisions, our biggest order yet, was sent to a major retailer overseas. We celebrated that night, believing we had finally earned our place in the global market. A week later, the call came. The sets didn't work. Not one or two, but entire crates. The images were distorted, the sound dead. The retailer threatened to cancel the contract, and with it, every hope of expanding beyond Korea. The news spread through our factory like cold wind. Workers stood silent, the machines still running, but their rhythm broken. It felt like the walls themselves were leaning in, waiting for us to collapse. We gathered in the meeting room. No decorations, just a long wooden table and the smell of burnt coffee. Our founder's voice was calm but sharp. If this is the end, let it be the end we fight for. The decision was immediate. No excuses, no waiting. Engineers tore apart the faulty units night and day. Replacement parts were flown in from every source we could find. The air in the workshop turned heavy with the scent of hot solder and sweat. Some workers didn't go home for days, sleeping on benches beside the assembly lines. 3 weeks later, we shipped the replacements. Perfect, tested, polished. The retailer kept the contract. That day, as the final crate left the warehouse, no one spoke. We just watched it disappear into the distance, knowing we had been inches from losing everything. That night, the factory lights stayed on, but not for work, for celebration. Not of profit, but of survival. We had been tested, and we had held the line. The factory floor had a new sound now. The click of assembly lines, the hiss of soldering irons, the hum of testing equipment. The air smelled of metal, oil, and sometimes burnt circuits when things didn't go as planned. We failed often in those early days. A batch of televisions would arrive with distorted images, or the sound would cut out unexpectedly. We didn't hide these problems. We tore them apart, learned from the pieces, and built again. Failure was no longer an enemy. It was a teacher who charged a high fee but gave lessons we could never forget. It started with the sound of silence. Not the comforting quiet of a calm morning, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a factory floor where machines had stopped and workers stood frozen. The year was 1997, and the Asian financial crisis had slammed into South Korea like a tidal wave. One moment, our order books were full. The next, they were empty. Overnight, credit lines were cut, suppliers demanded payments we couldn't make, and customers disappeared into the storm. It felt as if the air itself had thickened, making every breath an effort. I remember standing by the factory windows, looking out at the gray sky, wondering if this was the day Samsung would fall. But a storm doesn't ask if you are ready. It just comes. And in those first brutal weeks, we had to face truths that burned more than any financial loss. Entire departments shut down. Friends we had worked with for decades were told to leave. We packed their things into boxes while pretending it was temporary, though deep inside we feared it wasn't. The sound of those cardboard flaps closing still echoes in my memory, louder than any machine. For decades, we had believed that size meant safety. But the crisis stripped that illusion away. Our founder had long since passed the torch, and it now rested in the hands of Lee Kun-hee, a man who had warned us years earlier. Change everything except your wife and children. Those words, once strange, now felt like the only map we had left. If we kept moving as before, we wouldn't just shrink, we would vanish. The decisions were ruthless. We sold businesses we had built with our own hands, chemicals, construction, even parts of our retail arm. Anything that did not serve the core future was cut away, like a surgeon removing tissue to save a patient. The pain was sharp and personal. These were not just numbers on a report, they were pieces of our history. Inside the electronics division, the mood shifted from survival to reinvention. We no longer wanted to be seen as the company making cheap alternatives to Japanese products. That identity had been a cage, and the crisis had blown the door open. The new goal was terrifying in its ambition, to compete at the highest level, to make products so good the world would choose them over any other. But ambition without action is just noise. We walked into the factories with fresh eyes and saw flaws we had ignored for years. Lee Kun-hee ordered the destruction of entire inventories that failed to meet the new quality standards. Thousands of phones, TVs, and appliances, gone, smashed, burned. The image of perfectly good products being destroyed shocked the workers, but it sent a clear message. From this day forward, good enough was not enough. One day, I stood on the floor as a mountain of cell phones. Our pride at the time was piled high. The smell of burnt plastic filled the air as they were destroyed. Some workers cried quietly, not because of the loss of profit, but because they saw the death of months of their own labor. But in that destruction was a strange kind of hope. We were clearing space for something better, something worthy of our name. Our engineers began a relentless hunt for innovation. The R&D labs became the beating heart of Samsung. The hum of testing equipment never stopped. Prototypes came and went, sometimes within days. There were failures so spectacular that they became jokes. A TV that overheated so badly it could warm a room. A phone that could not hold a signal unless you stood on the roof. But every failure left a blueprint for something stronger. In the late 90s, we took a risk on a product that would redefine us: flat panel displays. At the time, they were expensive, untested in the mass market, and critics called them a gamble we couldn't afford. But the world was changing, and we wanted to be the ones changing it. We invested in factories so large they looked like cities under one roof. Walking through them was like stepping into the future. The scent of ozone from the machines, the robotic arms moving with precision, the constant hum that felt almost alive. That gamble paid off. Within a few years, our displays were not just competing, they were leading. Our TVs were winning awards. Our monitors were in offices around the globe. But success was no longer a comfort. It was a challenge. Each victory carried the weight of expectation, and in technology, yesterday's innovation is tomorrow's old news. Then came mobile phones. We had been making them for years, but they were never the stars of our lineup. That changed when we embraced design as fiercely as we had embraced technology. The new phones were sleek, with colors that caught the light and software that moved faster than the competition. In Asia and Europe, people began to carry them not just as tools, but as symbols. And when the first whispers of smartphones began, we were already listening. Yet even in the middle of this upward climb, danger never left. Competition was everywhere, from the U.S., from Japan, from rising Chinese brands. One misstep, one failed product, could undo everything. The memory of 1997 never left us. It was a ghost that stood behind every decision, reminding us that the ground under our feet could crack at any moment. By the early 2000s, we were no longer the underdog. Our name was on skyscrapers, sports arenas, and the screens of millions. But with that visibility came pressure. Every product launch was a test, every delay a headline. Inside, we learned to live in a state of controlled tension, the understanding that comfort was dangerous and hunger was our greatest ally. We had entered the new century standing tall, but the journey here had carved something permanent into our character, a refusal to be satisfied. And as we looked toward the next horizon, smartphones, semiconductors, even dreams of leading in space technology, we carried with us the sharpest lesson the crisis had given us. Survival is not about avoiding the storm. It's about building the kind of ship that can sail through it. The morning sun hit the factory floor, but we felt no warmth. Change had arrived, not gently, but like a storm breaking centuries-old trees. Lee Kuan-hee gathered us in the main hall, his eyes sharp, almost burning. "We must change everything," he said, "or we will disappear tomorrow." Those words were terrifying and liberating at once. We had survived crises, destroyed flawed products, and reinvented our technologies, but now the challenge was internal. Every process, every attitude, every assumption was on trial. The first step was ruthless. Entire departments were reorganized overnight. People who had worked side by side for decades found themselves in new teams, learning new roles. Some cried quietly, some argued, most listened, unsure if they would survive this new order. The air smelled of uncertainty, hot coffee, and determination. Every machine hummed, but now it carried a different tone, a rhythm of transformation. One of the first decisions was shocking. We destroyed thousands of subpar cell phones. Perfect on the surface, flawed inside, and that flaw could ruin our reputation. Watching products burn felt like watching parts of our history vanish. Engineers who had spent sleepless nights designing them stood silently, some shaking. But it was necessary. Lee Kuan-hee's philosophy was clear: mediocrity was death. Quality was the only future. And so we learned a hard lesson. To win, we must first be willing to lose everything familiar. Next came investment in research and development like nothing we had attempted. Entire floors of our headquarters were dedicated to innovation. Prototypes filled rooms, some promising, some ridiculous. Phones that bent, screens that glowed, televisions with unimaginable resolution. Failures piled up, sometimes creating smoke, sometimes creating laughter, and always teaching. The lab smelled of solder, ozone, and ambition. Engineers moved like artists, delicate with circuits, bold with imagination. The tension was unbearable at times, but each breakthrough was celebrated quietly, like a whispered victory over gravity itself. One evening, as I walked past the display lab, I saw our first prototype of a flat panel screen lit up. The room was silent except for its faint hum. I felt a shiver. We were holding the future in our hands. The colors shimmered like they had absorbed light from the morning sun. I thought of the families in Seoul who would watch it first, their faces glowing brighter than the screen itself. Every failure that led here suddenly felt worth it. This was the reward of endurance. The transformation wasn't just technological, it was cultural. Meetings were no longer hierarchical lectures, but debates. Ideas flowed in from interns, janitors, and engineers alike. Anyone could speak, anyone could be wrong, anyone could be right. Mistakes were dissected, celebrated as lessons, and never ignored. We learned humility, but also courage. We were becoming a company where the daring could thrive and the timid would be left behind. And yet, fear never left. Every new product was a gamble. Our first investment in smartphones was met with skepticism even internally. Some whispered it was too early, too expensive, too risky. But Lee Kuan-hee would not hear it. If we hesitate, he said, someone else will write history in our place. The words were fire, and they burned doubt out of our veins. We moved forward, producing devices that were beautiful, powerful, and dangerous in the market. The first launches were tense, with engineers watching screens like parents watching children walk for the first time. Meanwhile, the world watched Samsung with suspicion. Critics said we were reckless, copying, or overreaching. Each success brought more eyes, more scrutiny. We learned to thrive under it. The heat of criticism sharpened us, made every product cleaner, stronger, faster. Each launch was a lesson in resilience. Each mistake a lesson in humility. The smell of freshly printed manuals, polished screens, and sharp metal became the scent of ambition itself. And then came one of the boldest moves, semiconductors. At the time, the world was dominated by giants. Entering that arena was considered madness. But we saw opportunity. We built factories with clean rooms so sterile that a single speck of dust could destroy months of work. Engineers moved like ghosts in white suits, careful and deliberate. The hum of the machinery felt alive, almost sentient. We were creating invisible power, the heartbeat inside every device. And it was exhilarating. Some nights, I stayed, watching wafers spin under microscopes, imagining a world where our technology powered everything from homes to spacecraft. But transformation isn't linear. Not every gamble paid off immediately. Early prototypes failed spectacularly. Production delays frustrated clients. Engineers argued in hushed tones over minute differences in chip architecture. Yet even failures taught us faster than victories ever could. Every mistake became part of a collective memory, a shared map of what could and could not survive. Slowly, we built not just products, but a methodology, a way of thinking that valued speed, creativity, and above all, relentless improvement. As the 1990s closed, Samsung was no longer a company merely surviving. It was a company shaping the future. Our flat panel displays won awards. Our phones became desirable in markets that had once rejected us. Our semiconductors powered devices nobody had yet imagined. The factory floors were alive with a different energy now, confident, ambitious, unapologetic. Yet humility remained. We knew that the moment we stopped evolving, the market would punish us mercilessly. And amidst this transformation, we discovered the human cost. Long hours, relentless pressure, and constant uncertainty weighed on everyone. We built systems to support workers, offering training, health programs, and spaces for rest. Success demanded sacrifice, but compassion became part of our foundation. We realized that a company is not just its products, it is the people who breathe life into them. By the time the millennium arrived, Samsung stood transformed, not just in factories, offices, or products, but in identity. We had become bold, fearless, and unyielding. But more than that, we had learned the greatest lesson. Survival is meaningless without transformation. To thrive, we must destroy what is comfortable, embrace uncertainty, and pursue excellence relentlessly. This period taught us that change is not optional. It is the only way to grow, to lead, to survive. And as we look to the future, to smartphones, semiconductors, and global innovation, we carried with us scars, lessons, and the thrill of reinvention. Each device we shipped, each screen we lit, each chip we produced was a proof of what we had become. A company that dared to transform itself completely, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. The world was watching, and we felt every gaze like fire. Samsung had transformed, but the next stage demanded more than technology. It demanded courage. Smartphones, displays, semiconductors. We had mastered them individually, but the challenge was integration, domination, vision. The first big moment came with the Galaxy series. It was a gamble, sleek design, powerful software, features no one expected. Engineers worked through nights, testing, revising, debating every curve and color. The air smelled of plastic, metal, and determination. When the first units reached customers, we held our breath. And then came a problem that could have destroyed us, the Note 7. Early reports of battery explosions hit headlines. Social media lit up with warnings and anger. Internally, panic spread faster than the news. Our teams worked around the clock, scrutinizing every design, every process, every supplier. Lee Kuan-hee's philosophy echoed: transparency over fear, honesty over pride. We recalled the products, publicly apologized, and rebuilt trust. That crisis became a defining moment. The world saw Samsung not as infallible, but as accountable, resilient, and unafraid to act decisively. Meanwhile, our displays were conquering markets everywhere. Ultra-high-definition TVs, monitors for gaming, OLED panels for mobile devices. Samsung was no longer following trends. We were setting them. Factories expanded globally, the hum of machines like a heartbeat across continents. Engineers traveled between Seoul, Austin, and Suzhou, bringing innovation, learning, teaching. Every new product launch felt like stepping onto a stage in front of the world, where applause could turn to criticism instantly. We thrived under pressure, shaped by decades of crises and triumphs. Our semiconductors quietly powered billions of devices. Smartphones, laptops, cars, satellites, all carried our invisible heartbeat. Walking through these clean rooms, white suits like armor, wafers spinning under microscopes, we felt the scale of what we had built. The smell of ozone and the faint hum of machinery became a symbol of global influence. Competitors tried to catch up, but we had learned to move faster, think broader, and risk more. Innovation was not a goal, it was a survival strategy. Global expansion brought unexpected lessons. Cultural differences challenged marketing strategies. Products that succeeded in Asia failed in Europe, and vice versa. We adapted by listening, observing, and daring to pivot quickly. Each failure taught humility, Each success reinforced confidence. Offices around the world became mirrors of our philosophy: bold, adaptive, relentless. Employees were encouraged to speak, to fail, to try again. The corporate culture that began in Seoul had become global, yet it retained the DNA of perseverance and courage. Then came 5G, the technology poised to redefine everything. Samsung invested billions, taking risks no one else dared. Engineers worked in labs with a hum louder than any orchestra, testing signals, antennas, and networks. Governments questioned our methods, competitors mocked our speed. Yet we persisted, building infrastructure, devices, and chips that could handle the future before the future arrived. When the first 5G devices launched, the world realized Samsung had not only kept pace, but was leading. Space technology became another frontier. Satellites, communication devices, components for exploration. Samsung was no longer just a consumer brand. The products that once sat on kitchen counters were now orbiting the planet. Walking past engineers designing space-grade electronics, you could feel their excitement, the mix of fear and pride. Every connection, every circuit mattered more than ever. One mistake could mean billions lost or missions failed. Yet the same culture that had survived wars, crises, and recalls now thrived under this pressure. And yet, the biggest triumph was not technology itself, but trust. Consumers, partners, governments, all recognized Samsung's resilience. The lesson from every crisis, every gamble, every late night in the lab had crystallized. Credibility is earned in adversity. Transparency, accountability, and relentless improvement became more valuable than any product feature. The world did not just buy devices. It bought confidence in our judgment, our dedication, and our ability to endure. Behind the scenes, the company continued evolving. New leaders emerged, inspired by the decades of transformation. Mentorship programs, innovation labs, and global collaboration ensured that the lessons of the past were never lost. Every failure was logged, every success dissected, every idea given a chance to grow. Samsung became a living organism, adaptive, resilient, fearless. The faint hum of factories, the click of assembly lines, the smell of solder and ozone. These were its heartbeat, alive across the globe. Looking back, it's clear the journey was never about products alone. It was about ambition, courage, and the willingness to change everything when necessary. From a small rice trading shop in Seoul to global influence in electronics and technology, the arc of Samsung's story is proof that perseverance, vision, and decisive action can overcome unimaginable challenges. Every crisis strengthened us. Every failure educated us. Every triumph propelled us forward. Now, as we stand on the edge of new possibilities, AI, quantum computing, global connectivity, the story continues. But the lessons remain simple. Do not fear failure, embrace change, act with integrity, and never settle for less than excellence. The hum of our factories, the glow of our screens, the invisible circuits inside devices. These are the echoes of a journey that began with rice and dried fish, yet reached for the stars. Samsung today is not just a company. It is a testament. A living example of what can happen when people believe in a vision, act decisively, and refuse to give up, no matter how impossible the world seems. And as we continue, one thing is certain: the story is far from over. Each challenge will arrive unannounced. Each innovation will demand courage, and every success will be measured by the resilience that built it.